So, ladies and gentlemen, this is our first ever podcast. And today I have Draco Azul himself, Andres Perez.
Hello, people of the internet. Indeed, it is I, Andres Perez, creator of Draco Azul, also known as KaijuNoir, over on YouTube, Instagram, and other parts of the internet.
I'm glad to have you on, Andreas. So my first question I wanted to ask you was, how did you get started as a writer?
Let's see. So I guess in terms of just straight up just writing in general, a lot of my creative work started back in 2012 when I began my YouTube channel. I started noticing that there was a lot of indie kaiju film out there, and that not a lot of people were talking about, like Deep Sea Monster, Rego, or Daikaiju Eiga G, Gehara the Dark and Long-Haired Monster, Negadon the Monster from Mars. And I was like, you know what? Because I enjoy watching a lot of internet online movie reviewers at the time, like Geekvolution, Spill.com, now known as Double Toasted, or even back like Channel Awesome, because I admit I used to be a fan, like many people back in the day, of those guys. So I decided to try my own hand at writing purely like scripted movie reviews. And I just sort of that's where I got my start. I loved like analyzing movies, kind of breaking them down to their basic elements, seeing what worked, what didn't work. And eventually, by 2013, I saw Guillermo del Toro's Pacific Rim. And it was that special kind of movie that really tapped into that like inner child in me. And it really inspired me to check out a lot of the stuff that inspired Del Toro, such as like old school 60s, 70s mecha anime like Tetsujin 28 or Mazinger Z. And eventually that led me down the path of finding a whole bunch of cool, awesome, like retro giant robots media. And I decided to try my own hand at creating my own character, Draco Azul. And over the next several years, I slowly started crafting a story of mine, thinking that it wasn't really going to go anywhere. It was just like a fun little, like a what if side project of mine. It's like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if I did this with this sort of premise and these sort of characters that just sort of mixed everything that I love, from like tokusatsu, kaiju, mecha anime, just like, even putting in a lot of my own Mexican culture in there, or Mexican heritage and cultural heritage in there. And eventually I started noticing that so many people at G-Fest had created their own stuff, inspired by the same things that I grew up watching, such as Christopher Martinez and Jonathan Claude's comic Fire Beast Dorugan, Tyler Souls' Durantis the Lost Serpent, Keith Foster's Kadoja, or James Biggie and Frankie B. Washington's Robot God Akamatsu, especially, that being another like indie giant robot thing, whereas the others were more like kaiju centric. And eventually I shared some of my ideas with the late and great Christopher Martinez. And he was like, wow, this looks really good. You should make this into a full-on thing. And even James Biggie told me he want to see this like actually be turned into a thing. And with that sort of encouragement, I eventually like got a team together to take this script that I had wrote on a whim and eventually just turned it into the first issue of Draco Azul. And from there on, I started working on the comic scripts and slowly getting better at it, perfecting my craft or building upon what I had learned the previous time, each and every step of the way. And then 2020 came along, and I was in a position where I wasn't able to continue forward with the series for the time being, just because, pandemic, a lot of, financial situation difficulties there. And eventually, I'd already known my friend Matt Denian, a kaiju novelist, most well known for the Atomic Rex book series. He started showing me the ropes when it came to prose writing. And so that was like a whole other kind of like a ball game there. And just going from like comic scripting to novel prose writing. And that's when I started working on a series of short stories, and which culminated in the anthology book Primal Warrior Draco Azul Full Metal Chronicles, just a series of one-off adventures to sort of build on the world that I had established in the comic. And eventually that led me to the next step of writing a full-on Draco Azul novel, which came out recently, Primal Warrior Draco Azul, Soulless Blood, which I co-wrote with my friend Ace Maroke. And that was another great step in terms of just being able to like go from short stories to just full-on novel stuff. And that also led to me creating a brand new giant robot like IP of mine called Bravura, the Wandering Soldier. Pretty much what like Draco Azul was to the super robot genre, stuff like Pacific Rim, Power Rangers, Mazinger Z, silly, fun, over the top stuff. Bravura was my attempt at the real robot genre, where robots are made as like tools of war, sort of like grounded in a stronger level of realism than super robots. Stuff like Gundam, Macross, Dougram. What was it? Why am I blanking on the name there? But stuff like that. But and yeah, that eventually led from me again starting with a short story to sort of like test the waters with Bravura, and that culminated in a full-on crossover with Atomic Rex. And so hopefully I like to experiment more with Bravura within the realm of prose storytelling. So yeah, it started out as like one little thing that I did just for the hell of it, and that slowly build, and that led me to become more curious as to like what other avenues can I take with these characters of mine, and whether they be like novels or comics or I know keychains, figurines, prints, what have you. It's been like a very wonderful journey, and it wouldn't have. I feel like every single step of the way has brought so much, has given me so much experience to work with, where there was like just writing reviews on YouTube, or just scripting out comics, or even co-writing novels. It's been a wonderful experience that I've learned a lot from, and it's something that I wish to continue doing, and as I hopefully learn to sharpen my skills even further.
Yeah, and first thing I just wanted to say was I also was guilty of the channel awesome thing. I was a fan for a while, and then after what happened, I fell out of that. But so what a great start, an amazing journey like you've definitely been through. And one of the things I was going to say was it's great that you got to meet Chris. Unfortunately, I never got the chance to meet him, but everybody who knew him said he was a splendid guy. One of the things I always really enjoyed was that the writing is it's a little bit of like it's comic and nostalgic in a way for me, because it captured, I think, the soul of tokusatsu very well, which is it's fun, but it also has a lot of like action with like some mild seriousness kind of thrown in there because of what are the stakes that are thrown in, especially with like the way it starts out. It starts out like the first issue, for example. It starts out with this like big apocalyptic event, and then it's like, here we go, this is where I showed up,
yeah.
And it's great because it has like so much energy the moment that you get to these pages, and then you're already hooked in because you're not getting this big exposition piece. It's just kind of like, here we go, boys and girls, this is Draco Azul, and I love that. I love how it's just like, here we go, we're thrown right into the story as soon as it starts. And and then it's letting the reader kind of get some information as it goes along with the action, but you're also left some questions like about like who made Draco Azul, like even the way it ends off, like you're wondering, well, who built Draco Azul, who's the AI, or who built the AI that's working with the main character, and I think that's like something that's really strong with the character, just its first issue is like it pulls you in as soon as like you get to the very end of it, and from the very beginning as well, because you know you have the cliffhanger at the end, which I'm not going to spoil to the viewers because I want you to go ahead and read the disappearing and reappearing Draco Azul. As you can see, that's like shifting out of reality here. But yeah, I want my audience to go ahead and like read this book, but I don't want to give any spoilers away here. What's coming and issue 2 and so forth. But continuing on with our conversation here, I very much admire like your work, and you know I've been a big fan ever since like I got introduced to the character. So
thank you very much, dude. Yeah, this was definitely like I intentionally went into the first issue trying to be straightforward, to the point. It was also because it was my first ever attempt at crafting a narrative, like the first time since like middle school I've ever written a story. No, that's not true. I did script in college I studied film, emphasis in critical studies, more so about like analyzing the art of film as opposed to the production side of making films. I took a script writing class, and within that class I wrote like this like short 15-minute short film, which was again solely as a writing exercise. We didn't actually go out and film it. So like beyond that, the only other time I'd ever like put together a story was back in middle school, where they taught us about beginning, middle, and end, introduction, the escalation, climax, resolution, all that good stuff. But like this is my first time like seriously making a story. Actually, no, that's not true. I did used to write I think I wrote like a trilogy of fan fiction short stories back in, I want to say high school or college. I think it was definitely high school. I wrote like this like Godzilla, Gamera, Ultraman crossover, and I never published it anywhere. It was just something I wanted to do for the hell of it, and it was just like stayed on my family's PC. And I don't know if it's still on that PC, because I'm pretty sure maybe that hard drive is like long since gone. Maybe my family has like replaced it with a new PC. But yeah, like the few times I ever wrote stories was very few and far between. And so with this being my first like real serious legit attempt at writing something that I intend to sell, I decided to not to be overly ambitious and try to write a very short, simple story that would cater to my skill level, if that makes any sense. So it's like I'm not going to go in there, right out the gate, crafting some Watchmen level story. It was just like a single fight. I decided to take the approach I've seen with like a pilot. If you've ever seen like any sort of like animated pilot, they would usually show like a sort of day in the life, or here's the main character. This is what they would normally go through on a daily basis before eventually getting into the real meat of the story in the actual series proper. So that was my approach to Draco Azul #1. And it's like, yeah, just throw you right into the middle of the action. Here's the main character. Here's where he is. Here's what he's doing. Here's why he's doing it. And sure, there's a lot of, unanswered questions. And that's meant to, draw you into, lead into the following issues, which will provide further pieces to the puzzle. Like any good, ongoing story. You don't learn about like Spike Spiegel's backstory right out the gate with episode 1 of Cowboy Bebop,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you don't hear his famous catchphrase the first episode. Yeah, I mean, I thinking too much about Draco Azul. I'm starting to think everything's a comic now. Yeah, the first episode. Yeah, you don't hear bang the first episode. So. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. What was it? Also, that you mentioned Christopher Martinez, and yeah, he was essential to my approach to storytelling. Not only was he was my mentor in terms of like how to approach creating comics, but he also taught me like the single most important lesson I ever learned when creating art, and that was. He told me just bluntly, to paraphrase what he said, there's no money in comics. if you're going to make a comic, do so not to get rich or to get popular or whatever. Do so because you want to make something that you're proud of and just put it out there for the world to see. And that way you can be proud of the fact that you made something, and like, which is more than what you can say for like the majority of people on this planet. And yeah, it was essentially just sort of like making art for art's sake. And it was then that I realized, what it took to be a true artist. And to, because with Chris, he was always someone who stuck to his guns. As an artist, he could easily just sort of like, coast off of making fan art, like selling fan art, like so many artists at various conventions. And, not to discredit fan artists at conventions, I understand that, there's definitely there's a place for them at the con scene. But for Chris, he did do that initially, but he found it so much more satisfying to make something original and to find people like me who reached out and said, hey, I want to give this a shot. I think this is really good. I want to see you do more. He found that to be way more satisfying than making prints of Godzilla or whatever. So yeah, it was sort of like that he instilled that sort of wisdom in me, that philosophy. And it was like that from then on, I realized that I wanted to support independent original products as like, Dorugan, Durantis, Kadoja, Robot God Akamatsu, as much as possible. Even my artist, Tyler Souls, he's doing his own, another ongoing kaiju webcomic, Colossal Conqueror. And I always promote that whenever I get the chance. So yeah, it was that idea of just, the last thing he also told me was that because people are going to read Draco Azul, and that the time between comics is definitely going to be few and, far. There's going to be a lot of time in between when ish comics come out, because making comics is not cheap, my friend. I'm sure you know that.
Oh yeah.
So he said that if you ever put out a single issue, once a year, once every 2 years, make sure that it's at the very least for the most part, self-contained story. And that was the approach I took with, all 3 issues of Draco Azul. Things will start to get a little more serialized when we go from issue 4 onwards. But by issue 4, I feel like I've already acquired like a strong enough fandom that's willing to follow a story. But yeah, for those first 3 issues, it's like he told me you want to give the reader like a fulfilling, complete experience. Because, so often do you look at mainstream comics and you'll pick up a random issue of like, I don't know, Batman or Spider-Man, and you'll realize the plot barely progressed and you got to wait an entire month just to get another like minuscule portion of storytelling. What's it called? Decompressed storytelling. That's an issue I've noticed a lot with mainstream comics, because they have the resources to make as many issues as they want. They'll just take their sweet time making, having their story move at a very slow pace. But with Draco Azul, it's like, no, there's got to be a beginning, a middle, and an end, and everything's got to come to like a full resolution while still leaving breadcrumbs for, because there's still an overarching story as well. The last thing you brought up was when it came to like the tone, the tokusatsu approach to storytelling.
Yes.
I definitely agree with you. There was definitely a lot of charm that comes from classic tokusatsu stories, especially from that of like the 60s, especially, where you have all these crazy, wild, highly imaginative concepts like giant robots, twin fairies, evil and aliens. And nothing is treated like a joke. At no point do the storytellers, the filmmakers, the actors, at no point does anyone sort of like wink at the audience saying, hey guys, isn't it silly? Isn't it corny? And isn't it silly how all of this is so weird? Like the Sharknado approach, where it's like you're intentionally making it silly. I always love that sort of like genuine authenticity, where the characters within the reality of this imaginative, exaggerated world, everyone takes it seriously at face value. It's like there's no real tongue-in-cheek stuff there. Sure, there are definitely silly moments in tokusatsu. There's times where they're intentionally silly, especially like those moments within, like, say, Ultraman, where like there's this like little, was it named Gyango? There's this like monster born out of a man's literal imagination due to a magic space rock, and Gyango is just sort of like having like the time of his life, just like goofing around with what Ultraman, or whenever like when Ultraman fought Jiris and he's like ripped off the frill of Jiris and he's using it like a matador cave. Toro. There are intentionally serious moments, but then silly moments, but there's always those moments where everything is taken more seriously than usual. So yeah, I took a lot of inspiration from tokusatsu, even from anime as well. Of course, anime, a lot of crazy over the top stuff happens there, but everyone always treats it with a level of like seriousness and gravitas. And yeah, that's kind of like the same approach that I want to take with my story as well, to feel like, yeah, as you know, silly as it is to have a giant robot fighting giant monsters on a daily basis, at the same time, there's actual stakes involved. There's actual what do you say, physical, external, and internal turmoil going on with the characters within the story. So yeah, you do feel, to help you feel more invested in what goes on in the story as well.
Yeah, and that was one of the things I was gonna mention first off, was when you were talking about the fan writing project, like the fan fiction projects. It brought, when you're talking about your experience when you started doing that at first, it brought back an old memory of mine, which is pretty funny. I just want to tell you real fast. So when I was in second grade, I wrote a really short story on Godzilla fighting Mechagodzilla. It was a one-page thing. It was in the second grade, right? And I said in the origin, it's like, so on an island, there was an egg, and on the island, a bomb went off, and Godzilla was born. And my teacher literally told me, well, you can't do a story like that, because where did Godzilla come from? And I said, well, he just was there, and he was born from a hydrogen bomb. And or I just said a bomb. And they said, like, well, no, you have to write, he came from an egg that was a mother lizard that got mutated, and then he became Godzilla. So my teacher literally forced me to write an origin, like a silly origin for Godzilla, where a lizard just pooped an egg. And the egg got hit by a bomb, and then Godzilla was born. I just wanted to tell you that story because it came back to me. It was a funny little thing.
Right. So essentially, she helped you write the intro to Godzilla 98.
Yeah, she accidentally helped me write the intro to Godzilla 98. Yes. Yeah, but going with the fan fiction thing, like that's like when I tried to get into writing, ultimately I just couldn't do it because it's not my element. I'm a visual person, so I'm on the opposite spectrum, like where it is creatively, creatively is the word I'm looking for.
There we go.
There we go. I'm not stuttering anymore. So, I could make a picture and be like, so here's your story. Like, I can paint a picture and show you it, but I'm not very good at writing it. So that's my thing. I have to draw everything to show it. So I'm on the opposite end of that. And it's really always interesting to hear how writers come up with their creativity and their starting points, especially on yours. I can already see a lot of the inspiration can come from childhood things we kind of grew up with. When I first saw Draco, the first thing I thought of was a little bit of Gundam wing, with his helmet and the body, but then I also saw a little bit of Ultraman in there, especially with the color scheme. I think it was the red and the white that really popped it out at first. I was like, okay, I kind of see he's got a little bit of Ultraman's color in there, specifically the red. The red is almost identical, I think, to his markings. And then later on, it got more interesting when I saw the Kaiju, because that was the next thing I was going to get into, was about the Kaiju designs. What I find so interesting about your monsters compared to other other monsters that are made by fans of Godzilla and stuff, is that yours are very abstract in a way, but they also have a little bit of the ideas that we kind of come up with when we're designing monsters when we were kids a little bit. To give an example, I wasn't really good at doing anatomy for crocodiles and stuff, right? So I would try to do something where it's okay, his jawline's going to go all the way into his neck, and the head's going to be super long, and it's going to have a really big chin. And one of the monsters I was actually looking at in here, I'll try to show the audience here. It reminded me of when I did that as a kid, when I was just like putting ideas down, using my imagination and just, seeing what I come up with. And I think what was really cool is just seeing like these different bizarre monsters are just, they kind of, when I try to show it, I'm just hearing, hang on, ladies and gentlemen. It's
all right. I think it's just if you put it in front of your body, there we go.
It's this guy's in particular right here. The red monster. It's got the pelican-looking jaw, but the jaw hinges like so far into the neck. It doesn't look like he can swallow anything. I really like the design of that thing because it's just, again, it's got that childhood like abstractness when you're trying to like figure out like, okay, like how do I design like a creature or a monster? And it's like you somehow captured that as an antagonist and a villain for Draco to fight. And I think that's cool. Like, him and these other monsters are just very out there. Like it's got a little bit of like Ultraman and Gamera's like creativity with their kaiju, but it's got that childhood like essence in it, which I really like and admire.
So you definitely like hit the nail on the head there in terms of like my approach to creating monsters. As a little kid, I always just like came up with just random ideas for monsters, like in contrast to like the Toho, what I like to call the Toho method, where you take like a real life monster or a real life animal and sort of like exaggerated into a monster, like Godzilla with a dinosaur, Rodan with a pteranodon, or say like Kamacuras with a praying mantis. When I was a kid, I would just make random doodles of monsters. I'll just give it, a basic body. I'll give it some like claws and maybe like a spike club for a hand, or maybe I'll give him a drill like Megalon, or I'll give him wings or a tail. I'll just always create these like Frankenstein-looking abominations. It'll be like, this is a orange monster. This is a pink monster. This is a purple and green monster. This is a blue and yellow monster. Why? Just because. And when I started watching Ultraman back in high school, I really liked how fun and kind of random a lot of these monster designs were. Some of them did seem like actual like animals that would then just be exaggerated, but for the most part a lot of these creatures were just sort of like that took that same like Frankenstein approach of just taking something that's like vaguely familiar and just slap a bunch of wacky body parts all over it, or or even the Gamera method of just giving it a crazy random ability of theirs. So, and also another thing, as a child, I loved growing up, just playing around with clay. I would have like these, I don't know if they were like Crayola model clay or whatever, but I would just say yellow clay, purple clay, red clay. I would just like, make some random little monsters. And I took that same approach where here's a body, here's an arm, like Gigant's, like a sword arm, or here's like a club arm, or here's like, it's got 4 legs or 2 legs or 6 legs, or, here's like a tail, here's no tail, wings, no wings, snout or no snout, flat face. And yeah, that's generally the approach that I took when I ended up creating a lot of the monsters for Draco Azul. Although in certain cases, I would just take like a basic idea and sort of like warp it and twist it into something alien looking, because that's what these creatures are. They're aliens. In the case of Aquapithecus, the star of the first issue, that was a case where that was actually based on an old drawing of mine that I made shortly after I saw Clash of the Titans, the original 80s movie. And I love this like sort of like a humanoid fishman monster. And I even drew with 4 arms back in elementary school. Of course, I ended up removing 2 of those arms for the comic version, because at that point, that'd be way too close to the Kraken from Clash of the Titans. But I ended up sort of taking the approach of like the Gill Man from Creature from the Black Lagoon, this sort of humanoid fishman creature. And I decided to just say, like, what if it's like humanoid, but gave it like the strength of a gorilla, just big, burly, beefy, creature that's just pure raw strength. A simple but basic and easy to understand foe for readers to see Draco Azul go up against, with something like, say, the monster at the end of the second issue. That one I took inspiration from like a monkey, how monkeys are very like what's the word, ambidextrous with both their hands and their feet. So I thought, what if we had like an alien monkey-esque creature that could use its feet and hands as, you know, equal limbs? And then I end up just slapping in another crazy part where what if its hands are actually like flat, razor sharp, like paper like appendages? And that was an inspiration from like Zuriel from Evangelion. Or another creature, Wog, where I thought, what if we took like a hippo but gave it this like big nasty maw with these like giant fangs, no eyes, and like maybe armadillo back armor, just to make it just more freaky looking, look more it's like you recognize the general shape of it, but then all these little details added on just gives it that sort of uncanny alien vibe to it all. So yeah, I like doing that, just messing around with random body parts and attributes and just slapping on a big bright primary color just to make it pop out against the rest of the scenery.
I was going to say for Aqua Thickopus, or as I like to call him, Aqua Extra Thickopus. Extra thick. The thing I was thinking of with him was when I first saw him, I don't know if you remember this monster or not. Do you remember Kra, the sea monster?
Yes, I remember him. Yeah, I do see the similarities there.
Yeah, so I never saw that movie, but I always thought his design was interesting because he's a big, beefy looking catfish looking monster. And when I saw Aqua Thickopus, the first thing I thought was like, oh, this guy must have saw like Kra at one point, you know? Like I thought I was the only one that knew about that movie because, you know, like it's just a very obscure thing. But I definitely see the, now that you mention it, I think it's interesting, the Ray Harryhausen inspiration from the guy. And along with the other ideas that you throw it in there.
Yeah. What is funny is that like when everyone thinks that Gorgo was an inspiration for Aquapithecus, mainly because of like the fin-like ears. And as soon as I tell them, oh no, it's more like the Kraken or the creature from the Black Lagoon, they're like, oh, now I see like creature from the Black Lagoon influence in there. I just remembered there's a monster on the first page of the comic where he's got, that's Aquapithecus right there.
Show the audience who we're talking about. Yes, the Extra Thickopus.
I've included his name on the bottom of the panel as sort of like a way to emulate that style of like Super Sentai. Whenever or Kamen Rider, when a new monster is introduced, they have their little name and subtitle at the bottom of the screen in white text.
Yeah, it's a shame. Like, well, if I pull it in like that,
maybe you have to like get closer to the camera.
Yeah, if I can like.
There we go.
There we go. We got it. Now you can all see the.
Whoop.
Yep, there. Yeah, there we go. Yeah. I think Draco Azul doesn't want me to show his nemesis. I think that's what's happening.
Because the audience haven't paid for it yet.
Yeah. You can't show them that. They didn't pay for it.
One monster I remember having fun with was Roku. Roku is the one in the middle on that very first page, where he's just got these noodly arms with like spikes at the end of instead of hands, and just like a big old horn for a snout. That's just, again, just random ideas I just like slap together and see what happened. Or like Zubasa, that's like the snake monster. Like, I always thought of like that King Cobra posture. And then like when I thought about that posture, don't know why it disappeared for some reason.
A King Cobra posture.
There we go.
Where it turns invisible.
But like I just imagine that like King Cobra posture. I thought, what if all of this was just one gaping mouth? And I love that visual idea in my head so much that I decided to just like put it down, just make a little doodle, and then have artists and sort of like interpret that said doodle.
Yeah, like he's the love child of a pelican and a gulper eel. Like that's what I love. That's what I love of it. It's just like it's so bizarre, and it honestly looks like it could probably eat one of the other monsters next to it.
Yeah. What is kind of funny, like whenever I see like the Godzilla fandom, they'd always create their own monsters. They always give them. I don't know. This might sound like I'm being mean, but it's like this is just a thing I've noticed where people try to like imbue their monsters with all these crazy abilities and make them like super strong and extra powerful, and they can kick Godzilla's butt 10 times over. But it's like, no, these are just like silly little creatures of mine that that exists just to get smacked around by Draco Azul. And I don't really give them any powers per se. It's just like I treat them like animals, like run amok, like a mad rhino that escaped the zoo and started just going on a rampage, or even an elephant in that case as well. They're just big crazy animals that are just let loose upon the world by the series villain. And so it's like what you see is what you get. You look at that creature, you can already tell just how nasty of a beast this thing's going to be.
Oh yeah, like some of them are absolutely terrifying with like just their appearance alone, like like what they could do. Like your imagination kind of fills in the blanks a little bit, aside from just seeing how they interact in this world that you have. And then that was actually it's great that you mentioned the fan-made monsters, because that was going to be my next topic I was going to bring up, which is I've noticed something else interesting on the fan monster discussion, which is that a lot of people it seems like a lot of people start off like they make a story based around Godzilla, and you've kind of noticed this, like a lot of these other monsters out there, they look like Godzilla copies, some of them.
Oh yeah, there's definitely a lot of that sort of derivative Saurian template that a lot of creators use. And again, I don't want to downplay their creations. I'm sure like a lot of people, they pour their hearts into their original creations. And, I wish for the best for them if they ever have ideas of taking those ideas and taking it to the next level. I say that you can use Godzilla as a template and then put your own successful spin on. You can put your own spin on it successfully, such as Chris Martinez's Dorugan, where he's intentionally made to be a basic Godzilla-esque monster, because the whole point is that his comic series is meant to be like a look at the fictional film history of a movie monster through the decades. Or Atomic Rex. Atomic Rex is basically, what if Godzilla was in the apocalypse? Or if you look at like Garayan's own Nagorayar comic, it's like, what if like Godzilla was in this sort of like over-the-top anime-inspired like monster battle royale universe with a bunch of hidden cosmic lore just in the background that slowly starts to affect the story. It's definitely feasible. It's possible to use a basic Godzilla-esque Saurian kaiju. But on the other hand, there are a lot of people who sort of just make a Godzilla stand-in, and he's just basically Godzilla, but with a new name and a slightly different color palette.
Yeah, and that was the things they're going to bring up. Like, I'm trying to handle this the same way you are, like not to sound mean towards any of these creations, but like just the one thing I noticed is just like there's one flaw that I just seem to notice with a few of them, which is that their face, like the facial feature designs, like not talking about the ones you mentioned, but like other ones that we've seen on DeviantArt. And we actually had a discussion about this on a Skype call a while back about this. It's like some of them, like it looks like like for example, the Final Wars Godzilla or the 2014 Godzilla, but they just like attached a spike here and here, and like the facial features are almost too similar. And I see the only problem with it is it's a lack of identity. You know what I mean? Like it's not different enough for me to say like I can't see it's not different enough for where like it stands on its own as its own thing, kind of like for example, like when you mentioned Garan's, like one of the reasons that one works so well is because he's got a horn, he's got this big dragon, like Western dragon inspired looking head. You know, the body type is very similar to Godzilla's, and we can say that, but like the rest of his features and stuff are extremely different. So when I see him, you know, I don't see Godzilla when I look at him. I see what, you know, what he's supposed to be from the creator. When I see some of these other ones, like the designs feel just a little rushed. You know what I mean? Like,
definitely.
I feel like some stuff needs to be just done on the drawing board. Just see, like, okay, maybe let's see if we can add some things here, and let's try to add something else in here so it stands out as, you know, what I'm trying to, I guess, make as a character, you know. And that was my next thing I was going to get into, is like, let's say for like somebody who wants to make a character for a comic, or like a, you know, like just a fictional character, like how would you go about designing that, you know, like just
I would say like the biggest thing that I always kept in mind when creating Draco Azul, it's that to make a character be simple enough, like complex enough to be interesting design wise, but simple enough for it to stick in people's minds. That's another thing I've noticed with a lot of like OC creations, where they put so much detail, it's almost impossible to tell what you're looking at. But in the case of Draco Azul, I took a lot of visual cues from 70s giant robot manga and anime, like Mazinger Z, Getter Robo, Guy King, and they all took like had a very like simplistic approach. With colors, this kind of apply to like superheroes as well. They tend to go for like, I don't know, 3 to 4 colors minimum. With Draco Azul, I wanted it to have like basic like blue and white to be like the main primary colors. Throw in some black accents here and there, maybe some silver for the blades, yellows for the eyes to make them pop. And then I realized that when I looked at the design, I was designing it with the help of my friend Dylan McCandless. And like, I just made some really awful looking doodle on MS Paint. I gave it to him and said, hey, can you make this into something? And he did. And I was like, okay, it looks like there's like too much blue and white. There needs to be like a third primary color to mix it up. And I thought, what if you had a scarf on it? And for me, I had a scarf because I love the idea of just like some sort of form of clothing that adds to the presence, whether it's like a cape or a trench coat, or in this case, a scarf. It just adds, it feels like makes the character feel more, have like a larger physical presence, I feel. And so I picked the scarf because there are many designs that I love that have scarves, like the Shadow, or like the characters from Cyborg 009, or what was the name? Strider Hiryu from the Capcom games, and the, you know, Marvel vs. Capcom, or even like Black Getter, who had like his own badass scarf along with a cape. So like I saw this reoccurring design element. I was like, what if we applied that to a giant robot? And once he added in, it's like, that's it. That's like the last thing I needed to have like this perfect design. And it's like, another is the thing that I've seen a lot of people bring up in terms of character design, and that is the silhouette test. If you can remove all the colors and the detail and just break down a character to its simple silhouette, and you're able to instantly recognize it, that's when you know you've got a good design. Say you look at Pikachu, for instance, you know, big round body, pointy ears, zigzag, blocky looking tail. You know, you look at silhouette of that, you instantly know that's Pikachu. Or Godzilla, you know, upright posture, long tail, those, you know, maple leaf shaped spines, bam, Godzilla. So with like Draco Azul, I had like, you know, those like draconian spikes, large one in the center, flowing scarf, big blades on the arms, you know, that's Draco Azul. So yeah, in my opinion, the simpler, the better.
Yeah, I think we had a phrase. It was in college. It was called "keep it simple, keep it stupid." Like it was something along the lines of that. It was
for me. It was called the rule of KISS, and it was called "keep it simple, stupid."
Keep it simple, stupid.
So yeah, that's always been like my approach. So that in the rule of KISS, it has always been what I've kept in mind whenever it was like creating designs for Draco Azul or the monsters, or like character design, human character designs, just something like simple and easy enough to for the reader to process it and have it stick in their minds. Like, don't keep it too simple to where it's completely forgettable, but simple enough to where it's easy to say, oh yeah, Draco Azul, the big blue robot with the red scarf.
Yeah. And I guess for the next piece to add into that is like, so where you're coming up with your inspirations and you're clearly taking from multiple different sources, how do you make that your own, but without leaning too much into like, okay, let's say like, you know, like Draco Azul clearly has some like Gundam, you know, very popular mecha anime and tokusatsu stuff blended in there. Like, how do you like not lean too much into that where it feels like, you know, like it's trying
derivative
to be derivative? Yeah, that's the word.
Yeah. I guess like the easiest method I took was the sort of the write what you know approach. And with that, decided to just take stuff that I know, you know, that being kaiju and mecha, but then also add a part of myself that's personal, put a bit of my own self into the comic, and that primarily being my own Mexican cultural heritage. And this stemmed from a sort of dissatisfaction I've had with mainstream media for a while, and that is for, you know, growing up as a Mexican American, living in the United States. I've noticed that there was like very little representation that I myself found satisfactory. Off the top of my head, I can think of only like a few examples, one being Speedy Gonzalez, which, contrary to what many people might think, Mexicans love Speedy Gonzalez. And I found, as a kid, I found it so amazing that one of the main staples of what many would call one of the pillars of animation history was a Mexican character who was practically a superhero on par with the Flash, always coming out on top. It's like, hey, that's cool. We're being acknowledged there. Another example would probably be like Generator Rex, if you remember that series on Cartoon Network.
I remember Generator Rex, yeah.
Yeah, it turns out the character's like half Mexican, half Argentinian. And it's like, oh, wow, you know, it's like, hey, that's a really neat bonus right there. You don't learn his ethnicity until much later on, but it's like, oh, that's really cool. Oh, and he can barely speak Spanish? I can barely speak Spanish. But like, I think times like that are, again, few and far between. And so majority of what I would see growing up would just be either the same similar tropes of like, oh, he's like, there's the mariachi player, there's the guy who mows the lawn, there's the maid. It's always like some like demeaning role that a Mexican character would play. Very rarely do you see them in the starring role unless it's a Robert Rodriguez movie, and God bless him, you know, with stuff like whether it's like El Mariachi or like Spy Kids, for instance.
Yeah, Spy Kids, a classic childhood favorite.
For sure, yeah. And what was it? But then I noticed another trend. Like anytime you had a movie that did focus on Mexicans, for whatever reason, it was always about illegal immigration. And like, don't get me wrong, there's definitely a lot of good stories that can come out of that subject material. But it got to a point where I noticed that like anytime you had a movie about Mexicans, it always had to be about illegal immigration. It always had to be about the cartel. It always had to be about gangs and warfares and cholos. So it's just like, when can we have characters just be characters and not stereotypes? So that's when I decided to say, hey, you know what? Not only do I want to see my own culture properly represented in a way that's not demeaning or demoralizing, but also it's just something that comes from the heart. And it's just like, here's what I know about my own heritage. And at the same time, it's also helping me connect more with my heritage, because growing up as a Mexican American, I always felt like I was more American than Mexican. Don't get me wrong, I am proud of my roots, and I am definitely a product of being I am definitely a product of both worlds. But going about this project, I wanted to do Mexico justice. And I tried my best to research as much as I can, trying to get second opinions, third opinions from friends and family alike. And in a way, it's helped me get even closer in touch with my roots. So it's been just as fulfilling of a journey for me as it hopefully has been for my audience, to where I get to present a version of Mexico that's not just some, dirty little town in the middle of a desert where it's Dia de los Muertos every single day. Or there's this ugly golden brown filter over everything. If you've ever seen that meme, it's like Mexico in real life, Mexico in Hollywood movies, all brown. So yeah, I decided to just, hey, put it in a country that most people have never really thought about much. And it's like, I'm not even sticking to one location. I'm just like, one day we'll be in Cancun. Another issue will be in, we could be in Guadalajara, or in another issue we could be in San Cristobal de las Casas. So it's like, I'm taking this country and treating it as my personal playground, because there's just so many locations that most people aren't familiar with. So it was just so cool. Even with like the third issue, it took place in Monterrey, and that was like really fun to like research as the second most populous, wealthiest city in Mexico. Right after Mexico City, the capital. So it was really cool to sort of like recreate real life locations from that city, and use it as the location for issue 3 story. So yeah, I would say when it comes to just sort of putting your own spin on it, sometimes the thing that you could use for your own story can be literally right in your backyard.
Yeah, and I think that's really amazing that you have this culture that you're introducing in through your story too, which it's definitely expanded my knowledge a bit of it, because it made me want to research a little bit. Like, well, like for one of the monsters, for example, like when I was a kid, I was interested in Quetzalcoatl. I think I pronounced that right.
Yes, yeah.
The Aztec winged serpents.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, like I was interested in the mythos of that, and I was trying to figure out like where that came from historically. And when I was looking through some of the just the locations and stuff, I was curious, like, oh, like I've never heard of this place before, I want to see what this is. And I think that's interesting. You're showing this, you're making a world through this comic, but you're also introducing another world to people who've never explored, which is like right next to America. I think it's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of surprising if you think about it, how, Mexico is, right next door, and yet most people, I feel like your average American would not know much about it beyond like just the bare minimum or of cultural stereotypes, or just like, oh, Mexico, like tacos and burritos and mariachi and whatnot, and the cartel. It's like, hey, those are legit parts of Mexico, but there's more to it than that, And yeah, so far it's been like a wonderful. I've had like a wonderful like reception. Not to like sort of stroke my own ego, but I've definitely really enjoyed the response I've gotten to my comic. In terms of, especially in terms of like my approach to just giving it that sort of unique cultural flair to it all. I've heard from other Mexicans that they would say, be like, oh wow, it's like, hey, that's our stuff in a comic. I've never seen that happen before. A friend of mine showed my comic to a neighbor of hers who happens to be Latina, and when my friend told this girl, like, oh, here's a story about a Mexican superhero, and she's like, what? Mexicans, Latinos can't be superheroes. And I thought, oh, how sad is that people tend to think that because you rarely see it. Sure, we do have examples out there, like Jaime Reyes, Blue Beetle, but let's be honest, majority of people don't read mainstream comic books. That's just one of those sad, cold, hard facts there. But generally, everyone has been like, "Oh, wow, that's really cool. I'm glad that you're doing this. You're representing us in here." or what was it? Or even people who are, outside of Latinos or, Mexicans. Like whenever I pitch my story to my comic to like people at, like, say, conventions, the moment I mention that here's a guy who's like traveling all over Mexico fighting giant monsters, that, like, the Mexico part really like catches their attention. They're like, oh. So it's I didn't even intend it that way, but it's interesting that that's like the thing that like grabs their attention and sells them on buying a comic. And of course, I don't want it to come off as gimmicky, where it's like, oh, that's the sole reason why this comic is great, or that's all this comic is about. It's just look how great Mexico is. No, it's just like it's not. I didn't want to make it the sole defining thing of the comic, just making it an element, one of the many elements, essential element, and one of the many elements of the comic in general. Because, like, so often you would see people who would try to do something for the sake of diversity and then just have it and treat it like a gimmick, where it's like, hey, look at this character. He or she is so-and-so. It's like, okay, and they're so-and-so. It's like, yeah, okay, but give me a reason to care about this character beyond the window dressing, So yeah, it's definitely like a balancing act, you could say, where it's like, yeah, it is an essential part of the character's identity, but it does not solely make up that character's identity.
You used to live in Japan, and you taught as a teacher for a good while.
Right.
That's a whole different world. And, from that experience living over in Japan, is there anything that you absorbed over there culturally, and then you put into Draco Azul? Like, did you get any inspiration added in there from that experience?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So I created Draco Azul while I started writing the script for Draco Azul #1 while I was in Japan. It was back in 2017 that I started scripting it, and I was able to complete all 3 of the issues that are out currently while I was living there. I guess, yeah, and like you said, for those who don't know, I was an English conversation teacher, a conversational English teacher in Japan from early 2016 all the way to early 2022. A full 6 years I was there, and from there I had many interactions with all sorts of wonderful individuals, from like preschool age all the way to like senior citizens, and they could be either from like basic alphabet lessons to full-on conversations, or even just like discussing, sharing the differences between our cultures. I learned from them as much as they learned from me, and it really taught me the sort of like the intricacies of the English language itself. There's a lot of nuances about native level English speaking that you don't really notice when you're already a native speaker living among other native speakers. So I knew this a little bit about this, living in a community where people are bilingual, or they know a little bit of English, but mostly Spanish, a little bit of Spanish, mostly English, or even just half of each language. But doing it as a profession really showed me just like what it's like, how a native speaker would speak like compared to a generally fluent English speaker versus someone who's semi-fluent or someone who's not fluent in the slightest. And that really helped me when it came to my approach to writing the female lead of my story, Ramona Escobar. With Ramona, she is a fluent English speaker, but she's not a native English speaker, because unlike the protagonist, Eric, who grew up in America, Ramona grew up in Mexico. So there are certain key phrases or idioms or how do you say, proverbs or figure of speeches that so many of us would use on a daily basis, on a regular basis, that she would be unaware of or would not feel as comfortable using. For instance, if I were to say the word like time to hit the hay, I'm sure like in an instant you would know what that means. hitting the hay means go to sleep. But if you're outside of the American English speaking culture, someone who's hearing the term hit the hay for the first time, they'd have no clue what that means. Or, they would have no clue what hitting the hay mean. What's the difference between hitting the hay, hitting the road, and hitting the jackpot? They sound pretty similar, but they mean wildly different things. Or even something like, I can kill two birds with one stone. You know this as, I'm going to solve two problems with one simple solution. But again, if you're learning English as a second language, you would have no clue what phrases like those mean, because they never properly teach you these things in English education in other parts of the country. Even we don't formally learn those kind of phrases. Like a simple phrase like we'll solve that problem when we cross that bridge. We'll get to it when we cross that bridge. It's like that means we'll postpone whatever, however we're going to deal with that issue. We'll postpone it to later until it actually happens, and then we'll deal with the problem then. These are phrases that we learn generally in our everyday lives. We hear it on TV, we hear it in the movies, we hear it when we're talking to our friends and family. This is like another language, and the intricacies of casual level English is almost like a second language unto itself. And it's this level of English that I notice is never taught in any formal capacity, especially in Japan. So when talking to my more fluent English speaking students, I realized that they don't know what any of this means. And I'm like, oh, wow, I got to teach them this. If they plan to have conversations with native English speakers, or they plan to, at the very least, just, consume English language entertainment, which a lot of them do and like to enjoy, it's like, they got to know these terms. A lot of my students are fans of Back to the Future. That's like a very popular American movie over there. And there's a popular phrase that Marty uses. This is heavy. So I would ask my students, do you know what that means? And they're like, no, we have no idea what that means. It's like, a simple phrase that means this is serious. And then when I show them clips of the movie, and now with that knowledge of, what this is heavy means, it's like, this makes so much sense now. I've just been watching this Japanese dubbed or with Japanese subtitles this whole time because we can't understand any of it. So it did help me discern what it's like to be a non-native English speaker. And so that's helped me when it comes to my approach to writing bilingual characters. So even like whenever I'm like writing stories within novels, for instance, for example, I was co-writing with Matthew Denian the 5th installment in the Atomic Rex series, Atomic Rex Ballad of Bravura. And the majority of the story takes place in Mexico. And I included several bilingual English speakers. And there are certain instances where Matt would write a chapter, and the way he would write dialogue for these characters sounded too fluent for these type of characters. And so I would go in and sort of simplify their English or remove certain casual phrases and replace them with phrases that a bilingual, non-fluent, non-native level speaker would most likely use. So yeah, it's definitely, that's been my biggest takeaway in terms of what I've learned in Japan. And that is learning how language works, how certain people from certain backgrounds work. And so I wanted to have that level of authenticity in my comic and not just have everybody just be speaking like native American native level English speakers all of a sudden. That was been my biggest takeaway. The other thing I took away from it is for a project that I plan to do later down the line, and that is to do a one-off special, Draco Azul comic special, where that involves like just bringing the characters of Draco Azul to Japan for a one-off adventure where they are in a city inspired by the one that I lived in for 6 years, and have them like interact with certain characters. I want to introduce like pay homage to various aspects of Gifu City and Gifu Prefecture within that beautiful countryside. Make some really cool Oni a monster that throw in there. Throw in like this really beautiful water spirit based off of a particular bird that is native to there. Introduce what was it? Mikoshi, one of my students, her husband builds these portable shrines that they carry on these like massive wooden platforms and parades. So I want to like incorporate some of that, the Mikoshi portable shrine festivals that I was able to experience shortly before I left. So I do plan to make like a nice little, Draco Azul in Japan, but like also have it be very, very personal. It's not like, again, as much as I love Teen Titans Trouble in Tokyo, you look at that and you're like, okay, this is just sort of like the general perspective of what Americans think Japan is like, where it's like nothing but like Akihabara everywhere you go, and then karaoke and wacky, Japanese anime hijinks. Rather, I want this to be like a more personal love letter to the Japanese countryside, and while still also providing a really kick-ass one-off action story for the characters in the book with a lot of spectacle and stuff. It's only at the time of this recording, it's only I only have like a rough outline, but I do plan to eventually script this one-off story soon. And I would love it to just have it hosted on like a site like maybe Webtoon, just to put it out there for free for anybody to check out, just as a nice little again, I'm always like to explore various avenues for spreading the Draco Azul brand. So I thought, hey, what if I were to put out a web comic out there to draw people and not only pay homage to Japan, to my time in Japan, but also just like draw people in to the main comic itself.
Yeah, and Webtoon would definitely be a good platform, I think, to start when you finish that, to publish it out, just to see what it'll bring in, because Webtoon's becoming a little bit popular. In fact, somebody recommended to me looking into it, and I was like, oh, this is interesting, and then it's been expanding, and to be just a great opportunity to get into.
For sure. Yeah, it's definitely done wonders for my friend William Kearney, who has his webcomic, The Crooked Man and His Not So Scary Crooked Cat Girl, a dark comedy story on there. And he's also in the process of making another webcomic very soon that he also plans to host on Webtoons as well.
Yeah. Something I was going to add about the trip to Japan. You've learned the language, fairly well. Somebody who wants to get into it, what would you recommend how they start to learn Japanese?
I would definitely say the biggest help is to go straight into the kanji right away. And I guarantee you'll have an easier time than even I did. I definitely learned enough to get around Japan. I definitely learned enough to help convey certain lessons in Japanese to my students, like explaining to them if something was past tense or future tense, or if it was a noun, a verb, an adjective, all of that in Japanese. And I even learned, had some experiences where certain people who studied Japanese more intense than me, they want to know how high my level was. And when I mentioned certain words like meshi, doshi, keyoshi, they have no clue what I'm saying. So I was like, okay, I guess I do know more than I think I do. If I know more than your average student who spent 4 years studying Japanese, that's only because I forced myself into a situation where I had to know enough Japanese to get around, because in the countryside, there's almost no support for English speakers. I was lucky that I had my boss help me with a lot of the bigger stuff, like when I needed to renew my work visa at the immigration center, big things like that, where there's shockingly not a single English speaker at the immigration office. But that's another rant for another time, just in terms of just how inaccessible Japan is in general towards foreigners. What was it? Sorry, what was your question again?
Oh, my question was about if somebody wants to learn Japanese.
Oh, sorry. Yes, yeah.
Sorry.
So I mentioned like the kanjis are definitely going to help you a lot. And there's a book I highly recommend called Remembering the Kanji. Now, in Japan, they have this method of teaching kids, which is just to memorize this kanji solely based on the shape. Why does this particular shape mean this particular word? Doesn't matter. Just memorize this shape, memorize the brush strokes. And they expect foreigners to learn to learn Japanese through this method as well. But the unfortunate thing is that we just don't have the time. That teaching method takes way too long, and we as foreigners don't have the time to learn it. Don't have the time to learn it that way. So this individual who wrote this book, Remembering the Kanji, he found an alternative means of studying kanji, and that is to break apart these kanjis into smaller symbols, learn the individual meanings of those smaller symbols, and craft a little story around it. Like the kanji for break or vacation is yasumi, and yasumi is made up of two symbols, the symbol for person and the symbol for tree. Now, for any Japanese person, if you were to go up to them and say, why does the kanji for vacation mean person tree? They'll be like, we don't know. We never were taught to question that. But if you think about it, you're like, oh, okay, a person relaxing under a tree equals a break, a vacation. Or take the kanji for language, which is go. If you break it down, the symbols for language is 5 sound mouth. And you're probably thinking 5 sound mouth. Why does that equal language? Oh, the 5 sounds you make with your mouth. A, I, U, E, O. A, E, I, O, U, the vowels. And when I explained that to my students, my Japanese students, I blew their minds, man. They're like, holy shit, I never saw the kanjis that way. That makes a lot of sense. So doing that to all of the kanjis in the Japanese language will give you an edge that no one, not even the Japanese people, would have in terms of learning that language. So that would be my advice. Just go onto Amazon, look for a book that says Remembering the Kanji. It's like this big purple cover, and it's not very expensive. Download it, buy it, what have you, and just start memorizing all those kanjis, and you'll quickly learn, at the very least, how to read Japanese. And again, that'll give you so much more knowledge than most people will. You'll learn more Japanese in like a month than most people will in an entire semester or even a year.
Yeah, it's fantastic knowledge that you've given all of us here, and I think that'll definitely inspire the audience here to go and learn. Because a lot of it's like just getting access to getting your feet wet. It's like it comes off like to many people I've met like it's fairly intimidating because of all the different it's supposed to be set up, and everybody's kind of afraid of like screwing up, and like finding the right group to practice with, that kind of thing, or finding the right classes, because where I live it's hard to even find a class to learn Japanese unless you're in like one of the city areas, like the big city areas where I'm.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So my last question I want to ask is, what's the future for Draco Azul? I know that we worked on the keychains, which actually have one of the unpainted ones right here. If you can see it, ladies and gentlemen. That's something we worked on for G-Fest, but I want to ask you, like, what do you think is going to be next as far as books or maybe future merch? And I know you're doing your Comic-Con tours, going to different conventions right now.
Yeah. As of this recording, in a week's time, I will be in New Jersey at J1Con, where I'll be tabling with kaiju novelist Matthew Denian, where we'll be selling our comics and keychains and novels and all sorts of stuff like that. And yeah, I do hopefully plan on attending more conventions. At the moment, a lot of the future plans for Draco Azul will ultimately depend on my financial situation. Currently, in between jobs. So while I've been looking for work, I have been, doing the sort of, Comic-Con tour, going to various conventions, and I've been very thankful for being able to have the opportunity to do such a thing. While I've been, filling out applications and stuff. So, but I'm very sure I'll be able to, once I have like find another steady steady income, I'll definitely love to put more plans into action. Especially the main comic. For the first story arc, I definitely plan for something around like 8 issues for the first main story, and I do already have like outlines planned for the second and third story arc, for a potential second and third story arc for the comic, God willing, if I'm given the opportunity to do so. Aside from that, I also have more ideas for novel stories and crossovers with other creators, which I have loved being able to do. So in fact, speaking of crossovers, I'm currently doing an ongoing webcomic on Webtoon and Tapas called Gural versus Sleipnir, which is a crossover between 2 kaiju webcomics. And I was brought on board as a co-writer and editor for the comic. And as a result, Draco Azul ended up having a sizable role, sort of like he's like the Wonder Woman of the Batman v Superman crossover. So this series is a big, it's like essentially like a kaiju jailbreak story where these evil villains have captured a whole bunch of kaiju, all of which are OC characters from within the kaiju community. And Sleipnir, Gural, Draco Azul all happen to be captives, forced into these gladiatorial battles with each other. And so all of these characters have to team up in order to bust out of space prison and get back to their home dimensions. So the story is currently ongoing. It's a really sizable story, so I'm sure you're going to enjoy a lot of what we have to offer there, and a lot of very funny and amusing interactions between all of our characters. Let's see. Aside from that, I do plan on doing an eventual crossover with one of Matthew Denion's novel series. So look forward to that in the near future. Do plan on another Draco Azul novel that I have in the works, that I've currently been planning on working with a public domain novel that's always been one of my personal favorites ever since I read it back in middle school. I won't explain what it is just yet, but I think you guys are going to like it. What else? Definitely in terms of merchandise, I'd love to get into action figures. I did try doing so with Hop Toys, but unfortunately that didn't work out the way we wanted it to. But definitely have been talking with other individuals who do the indie designer toy scene. And so I definitely would love to eventually one day be able to sell high quality Draco Azul action figure. In the meantime, we still got the keychains, which everyone has loved, and I'm so glad to have been able to work with you on that, Nick. And we do plan to hopefully produce more keychains in the future based on other characters of mine, like Aquapithecus or Aquathicapus. Yeah, so we still got plenty of got more novels, more comics, more web comics, more merch planned for the future. And it's been really cool being able to do as much as I have done so far. And I only feel like I'm just getting started when it comes to Draco Azul and Bravura and whatever other crazy ideas I may have. Oh, one other project I want to do I'd love to do is animation. I have an idea that for an animated short that I would love to do as an homage to one of the one of the biggest inspirations and influences for Draco Azul, and I want to do this particular animation with as an homage, as a tribute to one of my biggest inspirations for Draco Azul. I don't want to get into the details just yet, but I'll gladly share with you, Nick, once we're done with recording. But yeah, like I said, I'm always open-minded, willing to explore various different avenues for the character, whether they be, merchandise, comics, books, heck, maybe video games, animation, what have you. Whatever opportunities that present themselves, I'm definitely very willing to try out new things, broaden my horizon, widen my audience, all that kind of good stuff, and still have fun doing so.
Yeah, it sounds like we got some very exciting works coming very soon, which is going to be very interesting just to see how this is all going to play out, and it's just all this new stuff, all this new content ready for your fans. It's going to be great.
Absolutely, my friend. And yeah, for anyone who is interested in following all the latest news and updates concerning my stuff, they can follow me on Facebook at Primal Warrior Draco Azul. Follow me on Twitter at PW_Draco Azul. Follow me on YouTube and Instagram at KaijuNoir. Or you can follow me at my Linktree, which is just KaijuNoir in general. And all of my stuff is available, for the most part, physically and digitally, all on Amazon.
Sweet. And I'm actually going to put all the links to your stuff in the description. So my audience over here, you will be able to access his comic and some other stuff on his Amazon in the description below this video after it's finished here. And before we go, real quick, I did want to introduce to the audience the horrifying new merch called Draco Homunculus. This is what happened to all 25 of the prototype Draco Azuls. We had a bunch of them that came out kind of weird when I was in the early stages of making the keychains for Mr. Perez over here. And since they're made of resin, I can't really melt them down, unfortunately. Not this kind of resin anyway. So best way to make it environmentally safe was to fuse them all together with hot glue gun and to turn it into a abomination David Cronenberg styled Draco Azul statue, which is made out of like 25
Whoops.
These. There we go. Yeah, now you can see it in all of its horror.
I like how you can see like the vestige of like a snout or a mouth opening up.
Yeah, and then the two blades are the teeth. Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
He's got these weird like eye stalks things on the sides of his head, or maybe they're horns made out of Draco Azuls.
Yeah, they're horns made out of Draco Azuls. Yeah. That's something I just wanted to show the audience because of how creepy it is. Sometime later when we meet up again at Comic-Con or something, I'm going to give that to you. Okay. and then you can sit there at your table and be like, so Draco Azul, if there was too many of him.
Yes. that thing, that phrase, you can't have too much of a good thing. Well, they're wrong.
I have proved them wrong. Yeah. And then this is a close-up of the Draco Azul keychain that we have fully painted and colored. We'll have those more in stock on a shop somewhere. I'll put a link down eventually when we get to remaking those again. So
for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely, man.
But it's been great having you on the show, Andreas, my good friend, and looking forward to all the new stuff coming out for Draco Azul and his fun adventures and slaying kaiju and having very smart and witty little lines of dialogue, like especially like with the main character training with the coach and the AI, and then just learning how to be a hero, which is great.
Rule number 95, Eric, concentrate. Rule number 96, aim.
Yeah. So we'll see you next time, and this will be me signing off, and have a good one, everyone.
Take care, everybody.